I always believed family was supposed to have your back until mine stabbed me in mine. For years, I worked hard to support them, thinking I was part of something unbreakable. But when the time came to divide the family inheritance, I was blindsided. They removed me from the will without a second thought, erasing my name like I never existed. No explanations, no warnings, just pure, cold betrayal. At first, I was devastated. Then, I got angry. But instead of begging for what was mine, I did something they never saw coming. I bought the land right under their house. And trust me, when they found out, their reaction was priceless. This is the story of how I turned my family's greed against them and how karma came knocking right at their front door. My name is Cassid, and for most of my life, I believed in family above everything else. I grew up in a modest home with my parents and two siblings, my older brother, Lucas, and my younger sister, Emma. We weren't rich, but we got by, and I was always taught that family meant loyalty. As the middle child, I was the quiet one, the peacemaker. While Lucas chased big dreams and Emma was the golden child, I was the one who stuck around, helping out whenever I could. When my parents' health started to decline, I stepped up. I ran errands, handled their medical appointments, and even dipped into my savings to cover expenses they couldn't afford. Meanwhile, Lucas and Emma rarely visited, only showing up on holidays to play the role of the perfect children. Despite this, I never once thought my loyalty would be used against me. I wasn't looking for a reward. I just wanted to do right by my parents. But everything changed when I found out about the will. After years of sacrifice, I discovered that my parents had written me out of their inheritance completely. No explanation. No warning. Lucas and Emma were given everything: the house, the land, and whatever assets my parents had left. I was stunned. Heartbroken. I had given them my time, my money, and my love, only to be discarded like I was never part of the family at all. But if they thought I would just walk away, they were dead wrong. The day I found out about the will was the day I realized just how little my family thought of me. It started when my father fell seriously ill, and my mother, overwhelmed with stress, decided to finalize their estate plans. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed everything would be divided fairly among the three of us. After all, hadn't I been the one holding this family together when things got tough? One afternoon, I overheard Lucas and Emma whispering in the kitchen. They were laughing, talking about finally getting what they deserved, once everything was set in place. Something about their tone made my stomach churn. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me, and I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through my parents' paperwork. And that's when I found it. The will. I scanned through it, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My parents had split everything between Lucas and Emma: the house, the savings, even the sentimental family heirlooms. My name wasn't mentioned once. It was like I didn't exist. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook as I read it over again, thinking maybe I had missed something. But no, it was all there in black and white. I had been erased. When I confronted my parents, my mother sighed as if she were tired of the conversation before it even began. Cassid, honey, we just thought this was best for the family. Best for the family? I was family. My father, weak from his illness, barely looked at me as he muttered, "You have a stable life, Cassid. You'll be fine." I almost laughed in disbelief. Was this a joke? My stable life? I had poured my time, my energy, and even my savings into taking care of them, while Lucas and Emma barely lifted a finger. Yet somehow, they were the ones who deserved everything. Lucas smirked. "Come on, Cassid. You didn't really expect to get a cut, did you? You don't have a family of your own to take care of. You don't need it like we do." Emma nodded, feigning sympathy. "You have a good job. You're independent. It's just fair this way." Fair? That word rang in my head like a cruel joke. Fair would have been splitting things equally. Fair would have been recognizing everything I had done for this family. But this was betrayal. I felt sick. Everything I had done, all the sacrifices I had made, it meant nothing to them. I was just an afterthought, someone they could push aside without a second thought. For the first time in my life, I truly understood that I wasn't a part of this family, not in their eyes. I walked out of that house that night with a burning rage in my chest. They had cut me out of their lives without hesitation. Fine. If they wanted to act like I didn't exist, I'd make sure they never forgot me. After discovering that I had been erased from the will, I tried to convince myself to move on. I told myself I didn't need their money or their validation. But the betrayal cut deeper than I expected, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about everything I had sacrificed for people who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. But the worst part? It didn't stop there. In the following weeks, my relationship with my family completely crumbled. My once adoring mother suddenly acted as though I was an outsider, treating me like I was overreacting. "You need to stop being so dramatic, Cassid," she'd say, waving me off whenever I tried to talk about it. "Your siblings need this more than you do." Lucas and Emma, on the other hand, had no problem rubbing it in my face. They started making plans for their house as if I weren't even standing in the same room. I listened in horror as they talked about renovations, selling old furniture, and how they'd finally have a place to throw big family gatherings that, clearly, I wouldn't be invited to. Then came the final insult. One afternoon, my mother called me over, her tone oddly sweet, as if she had forgotten the giant rift between us. When I arrived, she sat me down with a cup of tea and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Cassid, I need to ask you something important," she began, voice soft, almost rehearsed. "Lucas and Emma are planning on moving in soon, and they need some financial help to get things in order." I blinked. "What?" she continued, ignoring my confusion. "Since you're doing well, I was hoping you could lend them a little money to help with renovations. You know, just until they settle in." My hands tightened around the cup. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. They had stolen my inheritance, stolen everything, and now they had the audacity to ask me for money to fix up the house that was supposed to be mine too? I let out a breathy, disbelieving laugh. "You're joking, right?" My mother frowned, as if I was the unreasonable one. "Cassid, honey, this is your family. It's not about money, it's about helping each other." I set my cup down with a sharp clink. "Helping each other? Like how you helped me by writing me out of the will. Like how you helped me by giving everything I worked for to Lucas and Emma." Her expression darkened. "Don't be selfish, Cassid. You've always been independent. They need this more than you do." Something inside me snapped. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "No," I said, my voice cold. "You don't get to ask me for favors after what you did." Her mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but I didn't wait to hear them. I grabbed my coat and walked straight out of that house, my heart pounding with anger and betrayal. I spent that night staring at my ceiling, running the entire situation over and over in my head. Every sacrifice I had made for them, every time I put them first, what had it been for? Nothing. They had discarded me like an old newspaper, assuming I'd just roll over and accept it. But that's where they made a mistake. They thought I would beg for scraps. They thought I would watch from the sidelines as they built their perfect little life in my family home. No, I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything from me. That night, I started researching. If they wanted to play dirty, I was more than happy to play along. And as I scrolled through real estate listings, a wicked idea began to form in my mind, an idea that would change everything. It turned out the land beneath my parents' house, the very ground that supported their perfect little future, was not owned outright by them. It was technically under a separate deed that had gone up for sale months ago due to an unpaid tax issue. A deed that was now available for purchase. I sat back, my heart pounding with adrenaline. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The moment I confirmed that the land under my parents' house was up for sale, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasted no time. I contacted the seller, a man who had inherited the property but had no interest in keeping it. After a few negotiations, I secured the deal. In a matter of weeks, I legally owned the land my so-called family's house stood on. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wanted the moment to be perfect. Meanwhile, Lucas and Emma were still busy making plans for their grand future in their house. They had already started minor renovations, repainting rooms and replacing furniture, as if everything had already fallen into place. The arrogance was almost amusing. Then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. My mother invited the whole family over for a celebration dinner at the house. Apparently, Lucas and Emma were officially moving in, and they wanted to mark the occasion. The audacity of it all made my blood boil, but I accepted the invitation without hesitation. The night of the dinner, I walked into the house, the very house I had once believed was my home, and looked around. The walls had been repainted, the furniture rearranged, but it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Because soon, they would understand exactly what they had done. The dinner started off as expected. Fake smiles, shallow conversations, and Lucas gloating about his new investment. I played along, sipping my wine and waiting for the perfect moment. Then, Emma turned to me with a condescending smile. "You know, Cassid, I'm glad you came. It's good for the family to stay close, even if things didn't work out in the will." I raised an eyebrow. "Even if things didn't work out?" I repeated. She shrugged. "Well, you know, things just fell the way they did. But it's not like you needed the inheritance anyway." Lucas smirked. "Yeah, I mean, we all have different roles in life, right? Some people build, and some people watch." That was it. That was the moment. I set my glass down and leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp as a knife. "It's funny you say that, Lucas, because I actually have been doing some building myself." Lucas frowned. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folder from my bag and slid it across the table toward him. "Go ahead. Take a look." He snatched it up, flipping through the pages with growing confusion. Then his face drained of color. Emma, peeking over his shoulder, let out a small gasp. My mother frowned. "What is this?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "It's the deed to the land this house sits on." I turned to Lucas and Emma, relishing their stunned expressions. "Congratulations on your inheritance. But you see, you don't actually own the land beneath it." "I do." The room fell into complete silence. My mother stared at me in disbelief, her lips parted, but no words coming out. Lucas looked like he was about to explode, his knuckles white as he gripped the papers. "You're lying," he finally hissed. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Am I? Go ahead and check. The records are all there." Emma's voice was shaky. You bought the land?" "That's right," I said smoothly. "And as the legal owner, I have full control over what happens to it." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "So, unless you want to start paying me rent, I'd suggest you start packing." My mother finally snapped out of her silence. "Cassid, you can't be serious. This is our home." I turned to her, my smile never faltering. "Was your home. You made it clear I wasn't part of this family when you erased me from the will. Now, I'm simply returning the favor." Lucas shot up from his seat, his face red with fury. "You can't do this." I stood too, my voice deadly calm. "I already did." Emma's eyes welled up with tears. "You wouldn't really kick us out, would you?" I tilted my head. "Why not? You seemed perfectly fine kicking me out of my inheritance." They had no response. For the first time, they realized they had lost. The power was no longer in their hands. I picked up my bag and turned toward the door. "I expect you to vacate the premises within the next 30 days. Or, of course, you can start paying me a very generous monthly fee." With that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. For the first time in years, I felt free. I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving behind the stunned silence of my so-called family. The moment I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. They thought they could discard me, erase me from their lives like I was nothing. But now, they had to live with the consequences of their greed. And those consequences hit hard. Within days, the panic set in. Lucas tried to fight me legally, but he quickly learned there was nothing he could do. The paperwork was airtight. I was the rightful owner of the land, and as such, I had full control over what happened to it. No inheritance could change that. Emma, on the other hand, tried to play the sympathy card, calling me late at night, crying about how unfair this was. "You have to understand, Cassid," she sobbed into the phone. "We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just, what mom and dad thought was best. I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. And I'm doing what's best for me. She sniffled. We'll lose everything if you don't help us. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? After that, the begging began. My mother, who had once dismissed my feelings as overreacting, suddenly found herself desperate to mend our relationship. She called repeatedly, leaving long, apologetic voicemails about how family should stick together and how she never meant to hurt me. I didn't answer. Instead, I had my lawyer draft a formal eviction notice. Lucas and Emma had exactly 30 days to leave. If they refused, legal action would be taken, and trust me, I wanted them to fight it. I had all the leverage. But the real victory came when the local news caught wind of the story. A journalist, intrigued by the dramatic inheritance dispute, reached out to me for an interview. I didn't even have to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. A son, cast out by his own family after years of dedication, only to turn the tables in the most poetic way possible. The public ate it up. Lucas and Emma became a laughingstock. Their social circles, once filled with friends who admired their supposed success, quickly turned cold. No one wanted to associate with people who had betrayed their own siblings so cruelly. And as for the house? Oh, I had plans for it. Once their 30 days were up, Lucas and Emma were forced to leave, their dreams of a comfortable life in their inheritance shattered. They had to scramble to find somewhere else to stay, and from what I heard, it wasn't anything close to what they had imagined. Without the house, they were struggling. And without me, my mother had no one left to rely on. I could have sold the land to someone else just to spite them, but I wanted a more satisfying ending. Instead, I decided to do something even better. I developed it. With the help of a local investor, I turned the property into rental units, modernizing the space and increasing its value tenfold. The best part? Lucas and Emma, desperate for a place to stay, actually applied to rent one of the units. Did I let them? Absolutely not. I denied their applications without a second thought, making it clear that they had lost any right to benefit from my success. Instead, I rented the units out to hardworking people who actually deserved a home. As months passed, my life flourished. The rental business took off, and for the first time in my life, I was financially independent in a way that no inheritance could have given me. Lucas and Emma? They faded into the background, struggling to pick up the pieces of their shattered plans. And my mother? She made a few last attempts to reach out, but when it became clear that I wasn't interested, she gave up. She had chosen her side long ago, and now she had to live with it. I had won. But more importantly, I had finally freed myself from the toxic weight of a family that never valued me. And that was worth more than any inheritance. Looking back, I realized that this entire experience wasn't just about money or inheritance, it was about self-worth. For years, I let my family treat me like I was less important, like my efforts didn't matter. I kept giving, hoping they would see my value. But the truth is, some people will take everything you have and still think you owe them more. The moment I stopped begging for their approval was the moment I truly found my freedom. I didn't need their house. I didn't need their validation. What I needed was to stand up for myself, to take back the power they had tried to strip from me. And as for Lucas and Emma, they never fully recovered from their fall from grace. Without the family home, they struggled to maintain the lifestyles they had become so comfortable with. Last I heard, Lucas was drowning in debt, and Emma had moved to a smaller apartment, far from the luxury she had envisioned. They had everything handed to them, but in the end, they lost it all because of their greed. My mother? She lives with the consequences of her choices. She hasn't called in a long time. Maybe she finally understands what it feels like to be left behind. As for me, I've built something far greater than what they tried to take from me. I have my own success, my own happiness, and most importantly, my own peace. Because at the end of the day, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about moving on, stronger than ever.